To say that the Force works in mysterious ways is to admit one's ignorance. For any mystery can be solved through the application of knowledge and unrelenting effort. To be strong in the Force is one thing, but to believe oneself to be all-powerful is to invite catastrophe. Remember that even in the ethereal realm we inhabit, the unforeseen can occur.
Welcome to Monad of Creation, episode 26. If you listened to episode 25 with Blessed Energy, the talk I did with him on discernment, the responsibility of influencers, and angelic disgust, how'd you like it? Did it help you? Did you resonate with what was said? Did it not compute? I'm not sure. But today's topic is on salvation, which has everything to do with what we talked about in 25. When people step into seeking, the truth-seeking process, or the internal self-discovery seeking process, it's all the same. It all should be the same. You don't seek the external truth only, and you don't only seek your internal realities. If you really want a potent, disciplined awakening. And not everyone wants that, and that's totally fine, because the diversity and uniqueness of life is what makes this place, is what makes everything beautiful, all realities, which comprise one gigantic objective reality, with many different valid perceptions and perspectives immersed within them. So, salvation. What is it? In theology and philosophy and spirituality, this topic is very prevalent. And when it comes to, typical thinking modalities or typical everyday perspectives, salvation is not thought of very often. But when you think of things like habits, drugs, things that keep people comfortable. Those are what I would consider saviors. And then obviously you got the saviors, like messiahs. People have messiahs that they think will come solve their problems somehow. Or people take solace and comfort in the idea that there is nothing beyond, and they know all that is in totality, and that man can prove it 100% all the time, and there are no anomalies whatsoever. That's salvation, because they're seeking and gaining comfort from their firmly held belief. And then, with stepping into savior complex, people think martyrdom is virtuous, so they just expend themselves and become, a martyr. And they might think they're being a very pure influencer, a very pure, potent influencer. But most often, if people aren't actually doing the internal work on their own within themselves, and they step into influencing, they often become martyrs. And they become often subconscious or unconscious savior complex doers. They might energetically be messiahs, trying to save everyone around them, which ultimately gives them a sense of saving themselves because they think they're doing good work. I digress. This concept of salvation has been in the minds and hearts and the totality of being for all humanity since forever, really. And there may have been, just think about it for 1 second before I begin with this topic. What if there was a time with human civilization? Just consider it, if you can. What if there was a time where humans didn't fixate and worry about the future all the time, fixate and worry about others all the time, and surely did not fixate and worry about how they're going to be saved by an external factor? What if there was a time where humanity had open, flowing knowing within themselves and coexisted in this, at oftentimes chaotic, disharmonic, beautiful co-creation? What if there was a time where there was not as much nonsense? I could simply say it like that. Keep that in mind for this talk. So, in recorded history, contemporary knowing of contemporary mankind, humans, what we do know, and sure, I should have said it at the beginning, this is my perspective, I'm not forcing anything on you, this is what I've come to know with my experiential knowledge, and that's that. I'm just sharing and doing what I have to do, what I want to do, what I came to do. So, since contemporary humanity has discovered the ancient past through archaeology, history, documents, oral tradition, humans have always strived for being saved in some form or fashion. And the striving for being saved implies a lack. What is this lack? This fixation and obsession, and even really caring about salvation or anything regarding saviors or being a martyr for others, but specifically the whole entire topic of salvation, it implies lack of some sort. It implies a lack of, security, comfort, but I would say a lack of true internal guidance, knowing, and feeling. The obsession and focus on salvation implies it's a prerequisite for beings to be fixated on salvation and healing all the time and finding the totality of creator or the totality and lack of anything else anywhere in between. This fixation on salvation through belief, whether it's religion, spiritualism, scientism, atheism, nihilism, Rastafarianism, any ism, schism, which, by the way, all boil down to core beliefs. So it doesn't even have to be a solid ism schism. It could be a belief in some way, a being, some way an individual believes in being fixed. Salvation entails an external savior, an external saving mechanism, an external quick fix, which negates all requirements of doing an internal looking yourself in the mirror, checking yourself, respecting yourself, enjoying yourself, and really doing the science of perception and embodiment. Perception and embodiment. brings forth behavior. So if it's pure perception with healthy embodiment, there's probably diligent, disciplined behavior, maybe. So there's this lack of stability, this lack of true knowing in mankind of the unknown, of what happens when you die, of what happens when there are all sorts of anomalies in the world. There are all sorts of anomalies within our own personal experiences all the time that we can't explain. Not all of us have these anomalies, but if you really truly think about it, how many unexplained things, if you're an adult human being, how many unexplained things have you either heard or firsthand experienced? Whether it's seemingly irrelevant and benign or something of the sorts of a near-death experience or something with unseen phenomenon, or simply you can't explain why you bettered yourself in such a short amount of time. Maybe you stopped relying on things outside of you. So I'm going to explain a two-way street that I like to see. Or wait a second. I typically don't edit these podcasts. I actually haven't edited one to date, but I will just edit myself here. A little candid. I'm a human too. I make mistakes. I did not say I would like to see this. I would rather never see any of this behavior again in my lifetimes. Ever. But I don't expect or assume, so I don't really worry about it. It's just, I think it's not as truly evolutionary as things could be. And I'm going to explain these two paths that I have observed in myself at one point and plenty of others all the time. So as I said in 2 episodes ago, I made truth a religion, right? So this has to do with that. It has to do with a lot of this. So we're going to start with the seeker, okay? You're a seeker and you might be looking for the totality of, all that you can seek, all that you can know, all that you can find. So you're finding out truths. You're finding out perspectives in reality. You're finding out yourself, perhaps. And so when you are a seeker and you are discovering, awakening, whatever it is, you are often a sponge for information. You're a sponge for perspectives, and what that also entails is energetically, subconsciously, and sometimes unconsciously being comforted, being led, being saved by an external speaker or an external influencer who is relaying to you information. I'm not getting into if information is good or bad. This is a neutral perspective. If the being likes the information that's coming towards them and they're in this very sponge-like seeking mode, sometimes they start picking up these fragments of all the teachers and perspectives that they observe, all the different things they like, and they start being led in all these different directions. And their generative core, which should be flowing eternally from within themselves, and sure, in alignment with eternal spirit, with immutable great nothing, it's instead of flowing outward and discerning and looking at the external perspectives, the external information, looking at it, discerning, not even taking it in or rejecting yet. They're just discerning, figuring out if it's right for them or right with truth. And then if they like it, they just know it, integrate it. They don't get grafted or led or pulled by the influencer. They don't get heavily affected to the point where they start emulating that being and betraying themselves and honestly losing themselves. And what happens in the mind of these individuals, I have been there. You start to think that you're being saved by this external influence. You start thinking you're being saved by this external speaker or talker or influencer, teacher, whatever. Friend, family member, maybe. These external things, these external informations that are really just creating this facade, this illusory aspect in your mind. The only change is within your mind, right? You're within your mindset. And it just becomes this huge illusion of being pulled. So when you're seeking, often, some people might they might be partaking in substances. And, let's say they think they're getting benefits from the substances, right? I'm talking about, in this case, mushrooms would be a good example, or marijuana, or alcohol. I don't care. You name it. I really don't care. Any substance. It could be, let's throw coffee into the mix, okay? They're seeking a bunch, and they're learning, and they're also consuming substances of some sort. Well, eventually, it's becoming this habit that they're dependent on. So we're not even going to go into sobriety and addiction, but if you're dependent, just as you can be dependent on a substance, a physical, edible substance or consumable substance, you can be dependent on sources of information and the transmitters of that said information. You can be dependent on physical, consumable substances. Think it's great in serving you and truth and abundance. And that same exact principle can be applied to external influencers that you might really adore and start emulating. So I have been in really both of these situations. We don't need to talk about that now, but I don't lie. You can make up your mind however you will. And this dynamic is, honestly, when it happened to me, I was just not my true self. There were aspects of myself shining through sometimes, but I was being led. I had a savior, and in my mind, I thought I didn't have a savior. I thought I didn't have, some sort of, Jesus Christ mythos saving me and pulling me around. I thought I didn't have that, but I did. I was letting influencers and people who I was putting above me instead of as my equals, I was letting them be my saviors, my energetic saviors. And then I was letting, sure, at the time, some alcohol. Sure, I wasn't a drunk, but in order to have fun with my punk rock friends sometimes, I would do that. So in order to have fun in those situations, what did I need? Sometimes. I wasn't as bad as some cases, but it was still trash because in certain situations I would reach for an alcohol can to drink out of it to feel better. Well, something's wrong if you're reaching for something to feel better. That's a savior. That's an external savior. And this topic is very overarching. You can apply it to anything. I happen to talk about influencers, information transmitters, and substances for external salvation, right? And the way I'm going to describe this second path is very, very obscure, perhaps, maybe too esoteric and mysterious and ethereal, but anyway, it's sort of inverted, and you will see why. So this other path towards salvation comes from stepping into martyrdom. This other path of salvation comes from stepping into martyrdom. So martyrdom, if you never heard of martyrdom, it's when you are, yes, in service to others, but you're in service to others to the point where you sacrifice yourself. You sacrifice yourself in service to others, and you do not truly take care of yourself. You respect yourself. You expend yourself for the sake of others. That is martyrdom. And often people lose their minds. They go crazy. They don't really truly have what they need in life, and they're just letting all their energy and time, attention, and substance, their core substance, be sucked out of them for the sake of others. And it's often perceived as noble in certain areas in life, and these beings think they're saving themselves and they're saving others at the same time, often. Okay, I'm not going to say all the time, not going to make that much of a blanket statement, but very often people will step into these roles of influencers, of total martyrdom, and take on the savior complex, where their information is so good, their information is so accurate and helpful and healing and evolutionary to their listeners. And you know the people I described a second ago? The condition I was in for a few years a second ago. Well, these martyrs who think that they are helping themselves and helping others and don't realize that they're doing energetic false messiah work, false idol work towards people who nesciently, sometimes ignorantly, think that they're above them. Yeah. It's this really distorted, disgusting balance where you have groups of people, this illusory tier of higher teachers, talking to their listeners as if they're these beautiful, wonderful martyrs that can just help humanity so much. And they don't truly say it how it is and offer really beneficial solutions. So what happens is that the people that I just described, who are seeking so purely and honestly, and they want to find out truth. They really do. They want to find out who they are. So they start listening to all these teachers. And often, keyword often, those teachers will be, they have a savior too. Their savior is themselves, their little self. They think it's their eternal, true, mastered self. It's really their little self, because what's going on there is they're typically feeding off the attention from their listening audience, which is often the seekers who are not solid in themselves, are not given the tools to holistically find their true self, to holistically embody true principles and holistic intelligence and look themselves in the mirror. And so they're becoming fragmented, looking at fragmented things, and the fragmentation amplifies, and before you know it, it's like, I don't know, thousands of years ago again, where they're just a bunch of demigods and cultists that want to be led. And what this does ultimately in communities where people are trying to seek, communities where people are trying to know and feel and grow and evolve, it becomes a huge, like a roller coaster that somehow is just looping forever. And everyone's vomiting, but they're enjoying the vomit fest. It becomes this never-ending downward spiral, but it's party time. It's party time, and very few can parachute off this roller coaster and get out and say, phew, I'm glad I got off that roller coaster. I'm going to go do something grounding and real and calm and steady and just true, And so, of course, this can sound very harsh, and of course, I'm speaking from experience and observation. And of course, this implies zero victim-victimizer, zero blame game, zero enemies. Like we talked about with Victor, I'm not going to talk about enemies right now. Often these people I described have enemies, and they're not dealing with them very well from what I've seen. What I've experienced too. You know, I used to have enemies, and guess what? As long as I held them in my thoughts as often as I did, they were winning. So, so the two paths I described, simply put, are truth and eternal self seekers who are so pure and often naive at the start in the seeking process. Unconsciously, subconsciously, energetically being led on a leash, saved by an owner. And the owner is often an information transmitter of some sort. And the other path was someone who steps into the path of martyrdom. They think they're saving themselves and others in the process, when it's literally a feeding loop between the two. So I took a very modern take on salvation, because most humans, especially younger millennials and younger than that, and even some of the older generations, maybe the boomers perhaps, are not finding stability and actual methods within the orthodox religions, within, traditional mental health practices, things like that. So a lot of people are seeking to alternate sources of information right now in mass. And what I see happening everywhere is what I just described in this episode on salvation. So I think I'll title it just Salvation, and that's that. So rewind that if you need to, listen to it. It's very dense. No apologies. To update on the external supplemental teachings, I am doing a thought mastery workshop on June 1st, 2021, and the only way to access it is via the Patreon. And we will talk about how to master your thought forms, which implies learning how to generate pure thoughts and identify where any thought, what any thought, why any thought is. So Patreon, you also get some other supplemental content, $7.77 a month for the support of everything I do on the internet, which is all I have to do, truly. Higo Damask 144 on Twitch. And to close off this topic, really, honestly, folks, just really listen to your core knowing, your core intuition. And any feeling that comes through, be discerning with clarity in your mind and remain receptive to the great nothing, the unknown. And enjoy yourself, chill out. So this is really nothing frightening. This is really nothing so serious. Yet it's vital, important, and immutable. Salvation. I don't know what else to say. Maybe listen to this, and if you've never heard of salvation, go listen to some theologians talk about it. For contrast, because contrast is a vital aspect in life. Check yourself, respect yourself, enjoy yourself. I unconditionally love you. Later.